Hello and welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm Guillaume, your host, and each week I'm fortunate to share with you stories from climate tech founders, investors, and corporations sharing their unique insights into this fast-moving industry. Eventually, like me, you will learn, discover, and get inspired by those unique men and women who are contributing to the fight against climate change, and I hope it will help you to take a step in this formidable movement. So before we start, I just want to share a few words about us, as this podcast is just the tip of the iceberg of what we do at Startup Basecamp to support the climate tech movement. Our mission is to accelerate capital deployment towards climate tech founders, allowing them to focus on scaling their solutions. How do we do that? Every day, we help founders access to resources and connection and gain the visibility they need to expand their growth. We do this in a number of ways with a membership platform, a Slack group with a growing number of founders, investors, and experts from around the world. And recently, we went one step further with the matching services to connect founders with top climate tech investors. Keep in mind that we are able to do all of this thanks to the support of our listeners and our members. So please like and subscribe, share one episode with a friend, join a community, and if you haven't already done so, make a small donation to support our work. It really means the world to us. And now, enjoy the show! Hi everyone, today on the Tech for Climate podcast, we meet with Katie Hoffman, an entrepreneur, investor, and activist who built several companies from scratch before going down the VC route. He is now a partner at Regeneration VC, an early-stage venture fund focused on adopting circular principles within consumer markets, that notably has Leonardo Di Caprio as an investor in the fund. Katie comes from a family of lawyers and always thought she would go down the same route until her mother sadly got sick with cancer, which led her down a path of exploring what toxicity and pollution in our environment can cause someone she loves to get sick. Now she dedicates herself to deeply understanding the climate crisis, particularly the polluting industries. In this episode, Katie talks us through the intersections of finance and policy with the climate crisis and deep dives into the $2.5 trillion textile industry and how changes in different parts of the value chain, such as using alternative non-toxic dyes, alternative fibers that can biodegrade in the natural systems, can have a significant impact on reducing pollutants from the overall process. Second part of the show, Katie gives 3 tips for founders who are fundraising. She also shares a routine for maintaining a healthy work-life balance and her essential reading for climate tech founders. Katie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Katie. Welcome to the Tech for Climate podcast. I'm super happy to have you here with us today. I'm looking forward to the great opportunity to hear your story and get up to speed on what you guys are looking at with Regeneration VC, which is an early stage venture fund supercharging consumer-powered climate innovation driven by circular and regenerative principles. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here.
I know it's pretty early for you, so thanks so much again for taking the time to come on the show. So before we start, as the tradition on the show, if you could give us a 30-second introduction about Regeneration VC.
Absolutely. So Regeneration VC is an early stage venture fund. We focus on adopting circular principles within consumer markets. So that looks like design, use, and reuse of materials. So our solution to solving the climate crisis is addressing consumer markets and new novel innovations that are going to transform the way that we design novel inputs, so bio-based materials and the inputs that go into the stuff that we use every day, household items, the clothes that we wear, the food that we eat, how we keep those items in circulation. So the use phase, the brands that showcase some of these novel materials that are bio-based and or regenerative and add value, to biological systems. And then the reuse side. So that looks like reverse logistics, enhanced recycling, ways that we can keep materials in circulation as long as possible.
So let's start from the top. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal story and background? I mean, what are you passionate about? What do you do besides working on supporting and investing into founders? I mean, what makes you feel inspired or like your best self? As I always ask, who is Katie?
Yes. Who is Katie? So I got into investment by accident, actually. I always thought that I would be a lawyer. I come from a family of lawyers. My dad has done a lot of work in human rights and advancing the rights of individuals and making sure that companies are held accountable for deleterious acts that have happened throughout the years in our growth with capitalism. And what happened with me was, I think it was 2008, my mother got sick with cancer. And, it kind of reoriented my world where, I was going down this path of maybe doing corporate social responsibility and law and wanted to maybe follow in my father's footsteps and do more activism through law. And then when she got sick, I started to go down this path of what could cause someone, the person who created me, right, to be sick, and what are the reasons for that? And that led me down a path of really looking at toxicity in our environment, what we eat, what the chemicals around us, pollution around us, and what is driving that. So from that moment on, I dedicated myself to really understanding the crisis, the interlocking crises that cause health challenges, and also the root of what I came to understand as climate change and the climate crisis, and particularly, polluting industries that were driving the crisis. So that is what made me tick, is trying to figure out a way, how can we build better systems that don't make people and the environment sick? And I got through this path into investment, learning that, we have a lot to do in terms of innovation and building new structures, both systemic structures, but also new tools and resources that are going to displace the existing ones that have been polluting our environment for quite some time and making people sick.
And that's how you would define yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you would say I'm more of an activist, in the sense that what does drive me and how I show up to the investment table and what makes me passionate is I love to build new, beautiful things that are healthy in the world. And I find myself at the intersection of, if there's a problem, let's solve it, and let's find beautiful ways to do that, and invest in the entrepreneurs and incredible people that are out there solving problems and creating beautiful things. And I also am an entrepreneur myself. So before I started on the venture road, as many venture capitalists are, started several companies and got out there and tried to build systems myself and businesses and scale them up. So I would say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an investor, and probably an activist.
Fantastic. So zooming out a little bit and looking back at the different steps of your career, and you mentioned like this more like probably aha moment, or that you had with your family on one sense, to really like shift from law to more like the I would say sustainable world in itself. Do you have, during this whole journey that you had before joining the firm, maybe one or two pieces of experience that in a way gave you an edge to join the firm as an investor?
Absolutely. So I believe it was 2012, I was still attending university in California. And this was after the aha moment. I was writing my thesis on, the intersection of finance and climate challenges and how we could create better tools and mechanisms and systems. And I got an opportunity, a very amazing man, the late Tom Hayden, who was a senator in California for a long time, and also, created a social movement here in the US called SDS, or Students for a Democratic Society. He and I had coffee together, and he said, while you're working on this, why don't you write a law? I'll work with you. So he had a line into the pro tem at the time, Senator Kevin De Leon, and he said, we need to put some of the work that you're doing into law, into California law. So that was my first experience of, oh, I'm working on this in terms of research, and I'm, meeting with a lot of folks within the university to try and shift their mentality on investments. So at the University of California, we were working to get them to adopt sustainable investment policies at the highest level. And when Tom came and said, let's do this for the state of California, let's implement these policies, let's get CalPERS, CalSTRS, which are the two largest public pension funds in California, let's put policy and practice in place so that they start to consider sustainable investment and also the risks associated with climate inside of their portfolio. So that opportunity really, it shifted my mentality on, research and building to we can actually change law and regulation. And we were able to get parts of what, I wrote and put forward passed, and it has shifted the way that CalPERS and CalSTRS think about their investments and the risks associated with polluting industries and maintaining investments in polluting industries. And from that moment, it launched me into, well, now we have to, if we're going to shift, billions of dollars with policy, and we're going to have these institutions really taking this seriously under the letter of the law, we have to build the structures and the innovations that are capable of absorbing that capital. So that really was the pivot moment of, oh, let's pass regulation and let's work with institutions, and then let's go out and build the solutions on the ground that are capable of taking that capital. And that started my entrepreneur journey. And I helped build and launch one of the first climate ETFs, or exchange traded funds, on the New York Stock Exchange, using an algorithm that I helped develop with a colleague at Stanford. We have an old saying in California that Stanford and Berkeley, we don't get along, but when it comes to climate, we built some beautiful things, and it's Etho Capital. We still are live on the exchange, and it really showed me, okay, well, we can pass regulation, we can work with institutions, and we can build instruments capable of being low carbon and putting that capital to work into solutions that are more sustainable.
So we discussed prior to the interview to kind of like what would be the deep dive that we would like to do together, and you raised up the textile industry. I'd like to cover with you this, the challenges and opportunities that the textile industry contributing into the fight, against climate change today. So maybe we can start by giving. If you could give to the audience an overview of the textile industry landscape today. I mean, maybe what's the contribution in terms of greenhouse gas along the value chain? I mean, which are the different type of greenhouse gas and pollutants sources that you have identified and are specific to it? Maybe if you could share some data points for us to kind of understand this massive challenge as of today.
Absolutely. So textiles and, particularly within regeneration, we focus on apparel and consumer products that are taking in textiles. But the textile industry it's about a $2.5 trillion industry. So it is enormous. It is also one of the most polluting industries, next to transportation and energy writ large when it comes to greenhouse gases. So roughly the estimates are that the textile and apparel industry, particularly fashion therein, is about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And the challenging thing there is that's actually not the biggest issue with textiles and apparel. A lot of the biggest issues have to do with the other toxins that go into the processing, the dyeing, the sewing, the cutting, right? So we have some really big challenges around the toxic chemicals that are going into what makes our textiles and the end product, what goes through the entire supply chain, right? And then also what some would say are abhorrent labor practices with a very distributed supply chain and value chain from source to end product. And then, of course, you've got a significant waste challenge where a lot of textiles are being shipped to developing countries and landfilled or coming into natural systems. And they're not necessary, right? These are not necessary things that we need to be doing, right? So fast fashion, getting a new t-shirt, and then there is no such thing as a way, right? You throw it out into a garbage bin, and right now there are heavy subsidies and an unequal playing field, I would say, for shipping that waste, what we would call waste, to places where they're not processing it necessarily in a way that's for repurposing. It's just going into natural systems and creating other challenges such as methane or CH4, which has a lifeline that is actually more potent than carbon, which we know to be the kind of prominent greenhouse gas. So anything when we're talking about waste and waste streams, we're typically talking about methane and the challenge that comes with that. So across the entire chain of textiles, we've got significant challenges, and we've got incumbent players, right? Very large organizations that often have not built their systems to address these issues quickly. And it's something that, at least from the regeneration perspective, we are working at different areas of the value chain to introduce solutions, be it alternative dyes that are non-toxic and use less water, to alternative fibers that are bio-based and actually can biodegrade into natural systems. And of course, working with companies that have strong labor practices and are setting the bar higher for the economy and for people.
So probably we dive a little bit on more like the existing alternatives along that value chain, and we won't be able to cover everything today. But I'd like to just to understand, to get a better understanding of, like, I mean, you mentioned like those large producers, those large buyers. Like, could you tell us a bit more, like, how is the market organized today around the textile and apparel industry? I mean, which are the main producer and buyer, and where are they located? Are they all in the US? No, we know that it's probably in Asia as well. But I mean, what is the incentivize today incentive to create some change and to go towards those better alternatives that we'll cover after?
Absolutely. And you are right. Asia would be the largest producer and exporter of textile products. And that is growing as, the Asian region is scaling up and growing in terms of GDP. So we know that is a huge market. We also have parts of Western Asia or the Middle East that are growing incredibly and becoming stronger within the marketplace. The EU and the US have traditionally also been, quite prominent within the industry with textiles, but now we are seeing regulation, particularly within the EU, that is working to ensure that, there's extended producer responsibility, the sourcing of materials, that, that there is structure around how textiles are produced, processed, making it into the market, and then ultimately at the end of life or end of use of those products, where they're going. So that I would say is probably the strongest form of regulation that we're seeing in terms of the market, because Europe and, the UK, if we consider the EU, UK, are some of the largest consumers of these textiles as well. And so is the United States. But the EU has, because of some of the strict chemical regulations they have with something called REACH, they've been able to put some pressure, at least downward pressure, on producers to ensure that certain chemicals are not within their supply. And that is regulated. And then there's, of course, hazardous waste within the United States that you have to, and California has some of the strictest regulations around that. So that has put some pressure on the textile industry to transform. Yet we still are talking about a highly distributed sourcing and value chain, where a lot of this is coming from countries where those regulations are not there. And the institutions or the regulatory agencies that are tasked in Europe and California to actually implement these regulations don't oftentimes have the manpower or the capability to test these products and to actually implement at scale. And it really does have to come from consumers as well as the producers, right? Because I think there's still a lot of challenges with the big one in the room would be subsidizing polyester or things that are plastic or petroleum based. We still have a ton of subsidies, and cotton. So there's a ton of subsidies within the marketplace for two staples that are critical within the textile or at least fashion industry, but textiles writ large. And until there is a shift and an even playing field, I would say, on the ways in which cotton is created, and oftentimes with suboptimal labor conditions in countries where there isn't heavy regulation for that. As some would refer to that as child slavery, and there's been many cases around that we've seen, as well as subsidized petroleum-based polyester products that don't have a high recycling rate, and the infrastructure is not there necessarily to recycle those products. So we're seeing, cheap goods, cheap textiles that are coming, from a subsidized system that hasn't really integrated the full cost and value of those garments or textiles.
Thanks so much for sharing this larger overview. So now that we know a little bit more like the magnitude of the problem here, like to just get a few example of like alternatives that you see along that value chain. And as you mentioned, it goes from the entrance to the way how you process, and then the way how you eventually recycle, or like the circularity behind that. But maybe you can give to the audience like some 1, 2, or 3 example of existing alternatives to this, new upcoming innovation with their potential and weaknesses and challenge that you have identified.
Absolutely. So one of our investments is a apparel company, and called Pangaea. They're based in the UK. And really, we look at them, they're an apparel company, but we look at them more as a materials platform. So for the last several years, they've been testing and bringing in bio-based alternatives to your traditional polyester textiles and production. So from the source and where they're growing the alternatives, and this could be anything from seaweed derived fibers to lyocell to other, honestly, organic cotton is actually not the worst depending on where you grow it. And they have a strong strategy with working at the supplier level to ensure that the biodiversity protections in place are strong, and that the sourcing and the development of those bio-based inputs is happening in alignment with the bioregion that they're in. So it's actually a regenerative process in terms of farming at the source level, rather than an extractive one that's perhaps using pesticides, heavy water, and oftentimes we see poor labor conditions as well. So with Pangaea, they're working more on the materials innovation side to create garments and other textiles. And that has been wonderful to watch because they have a diversity of different inputs that are, like I said, all biologically based and are inspired by natural systems. So that's one example. Another example would be another investment we made that actually was, in partnership with with Pangaea, and they're called Colorifics. They're also based in the UK, and they use microbiology and microorganisms to create a dyeing alternative that is less toxic, 100% less toxic, so no harmful chemicals. And I think they achieve, at least upward of an 80% water reduction, because dyeing has an incredible water imprint. And it's able to catch to the types of materials that your garments need or your textiles need in order for the performance to make sense. So we're talking about, a bio-based input that is actually achieving color parity with the more harmful alternatives. And we're really excited by the promise of microbiology and biomanufacturing to get us closer to not just dyes, but anything that can go into the textile to make it function well, to what consumers are accustomed to, and also what large brands, the H&Ms of the world are looking for in terms of performance. The last one I'll say, which is also exciting, it's a recent investment that we just made. It's called Nature Coatings. Sorry, I'm going to repeat that because we can edit. Nature Coatings International, and they are an incredible firm that uses woody pulp from tree waste, right? FSC certified tree waste, into a closed loop pyrolysis process, which actually is less energy intensive, less water intensive, and it has a complete closed loop system to create a biochar that then can do what is a displacement for carbon black, which is an incredibly polluting dye, but also used in just about anything that is black in our world, has carbon black associated with it, and it's often petroleum based, and it is highly toxic. It has PM 2.5, which is some of the most granular particulates that are incredibly toxic to human health and the health of other species. And it is able, through their process, they're able to create, a dye as well. But the carbon black alternative that they've created can go into other products as well.
So Out of this in this value chain, like which are the maybe like one or two I would say like part of it that is very complicated to replace the traditional like pollutant and I would say dark matter that we're using in the value chain. Do you see like any place where you would like to see innovation and where it's excessively difficult as of today to have something that can be viable economically and also at a larger scale?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And my partners and I were having this conversation yesterday. I was mentioning microorganisms and biomanufacturing. That is probably the most exciting opportunity to displace traditional petroleum-based products that, right now are just cheap, easy to produce, and often subsidized. And it's what we've been doing for quite a while. And the incumbent infrastructure is designed for petroleum-based products, which affect everything within the textile, apparel, and fashion industries. So the more we can get biomanufacturing online and we can scale up either plugins to existing infrastructure that are lower cost and or moving towards facilities that can process at scale the microorganisms and biological inputs necessary to displace petroleum-based inputs. The U.S. has put forward some subsidies recently. There was an executive order in 2022 from the Biden and Harris administration to ramp up biomanufacturing here in the US. There is certainly a lot of emphasis now, I think, from governments on how we can create this infrastructure, but currently it is not at parity with existing, and we need to ramp it up.
So to close this section, I mean, what are the major constraints that you have identified? Do you see any major roadblock, or is it a need of? I mean, you covered already a part like the policy in place. Do we need some new ones to be applied? I mean, what needs to happen to accelerate the movement and have a decarbonized textile alternative going mainstream? So all of those solutions that you're mentioning and many others that are out there today, I mean, what needs to happen to go mainstream? I mean, and how far are we at today?
It's a great question. So some of the largest fashion brands, carrying LVMH, H&M, Zara, have all adopted, policies around circularity, policies around lowering their carbon footprint. And many of them are actively investing, including in some of the companies that we invest in these alternatives to bring them to scale. What I was mentioning before was more on the first part of the value chain, right? So the design of new products. One area that I believe is going to continue to grow and where it would be wonderful from the consumer side is the reverse logistics side. So keeping materials in circulation longer, recycling materials. We've invested in companies that, help reuse and resale. We've obviously seen things like ThreadUp and Poshmark, which are quite popular and have become more mainstream and raised quite a bit of capital to bring their circular business models online. So I do think there's a big opportunity, not just in the new materials and inputs that we're putting into our textiles and products that we use therein, but it's also keeping those materials in circulation and ramping up the infrastructure, the logistics, and the systems that enable us to resale, reuse, repair, right? There's big movements out there that are consumer-led often to allow consumers to repair. There have actually been laws in place that made it far cheaper for consumers to get rid of something than to repair it. So there's now a movement, I believe, that says, hey, it's actually better for us to keep this in circulation or to swap things or to give it to a logistics company that will, wash it in a healthy way and recirculate. So I do think that that is going to be a huge movement, because fast fashion, as much as things change seasonally, and I do believe that demand is not going anywhere in the sense that people still like to buy things that make them feel good, and there's still fashion week and fashion seasons, and that's fine. We are seeing a movement though, and I mean, we just saw it at the Oscars with people wearing completely recycled and refurbished clothing, and that's absolutely gorgeous. And that demonstrates that there's a cultural shift that's happening, as well as some of the larger brands recognizing, not only because of regulation, but because of cost, they're going to need to keep things in circulation. And there is, like, the last thing I'll say is the next generation, I'm a mid-millennial, right? So I'm in the middle group, but the generations coming after me, my niece and nephew who are 14 and 18, they want products that are healthy, right? So the demand is shifting. They don't want to be polluting the environment. They weren't raised maybe under the same consumer mentality because they're living in a world with so much waste around them, and climate change is exigent. So they're saying, hey, why don't we have better? Our demand is there. So give us better products. And we want to make sure that it's verified. We want to be able to scan, a label and know exactly where it came from and that it wasn't using child labor or products that are causing the environment harm. So, or inputs, I should say. So I do think that we're seeing a big shift on multiple ends. And within the next several years, it's going to be quite exciting for the industry and a lot of the displacement of some of the more harmful inputs.
Last question for this section on my side. You're at the forefront of this innovation. You see so many innovation passing by. Can you tell us maybe what, according to you, what are the US advantages and weaknesses in regard of this innovation and the production that could lead to decarbonize the textile industry? How do you compare the US versus China and the EU?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. We aren't doing a lot of production or source of textiles in the US. We're importing a lot. We are a consumer of a lot of textiles. So in terms of an advantage, I think that we have an incredible advantage in our consumer power and purchasing power in what our demand cycle will look like. And like I was just mentioning, with the next generation coming up and actually putting pressure on companies to meet the requirements that they say they're going to do. If you say you're going to address climate change, what does that look like? Show us transparency. We have a cell phone. I also think that we have a big movement amongst the government right now as well to keep resources in circulation here in the US as a competitive advantage to outsourcing to places like China, where we have been quite reliant on importing cheap goods. And the idea is we would like to stop subsidizing that and perhaps put more investment into infrastructure around keeping both critical resources in circulation as well as textiles, so that we are not also reliant on shipping waste out, which has been a big challenge. The US has shipped a lot of waste, including textiles, to other places in the world. And we have to address that issue. And this current administration is definitely incentivizing that in alignment with incentivizing, through the Inflation Reduction Act and, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, not specific to textiles, but certainly specific to incentivizing manufacturing that's going to be low carbon, incentivizing systems and processes that are going to have that lower carbon footprint from a measurable perspective. So I think when it comes to textiles, we're going to see a lot more of that within the ecosystem as well. I think that Europe is far ahead of the curve with policies that have been passed. The circular economy was incentivizing how to keep, textile production less harmful. But of course, when it comes to, sourcing goods, there's higher regulatory standards in terms of testing, understanding, mapping your value chain, ensuring that, if there is tariffs, for example, there isn't a subsidy for sourcing from cheaper places that often are not using or aligned with the regulatory standards. And then, of course, the recycling standards in the EU are really ramping up when it comes to textiles and what producers and companies are going to have to be accountable for.
Any question I should have asked for this first part of the interview that I didn't on the textile topic?
It's a great question. I don't. No.
Or anything you would like to add? I think you have been generous enough to share a lot of super insights in there, but always open for an extra add-on if you have.
Yeah, I think the one thing that is is exciting beyond just regulation. The last thing I'll add, because I know I talked quite a bit about that, and that's also a part of my background. I think that it really is important to emphasize that demand is shifting, and that, especially after the pandemic, right, where a lot of consumers are, ordering things online, and things are being shipped, and there's obviously sending garments back happening around the shift in demand as well. And I think that we are going to see, not just from the regulatory side, but also the carrot side. So like the stick is there for sure, but we're going to start seeing a lot more innovation because demand is shifting. And we have the technology now that maybe we didn't have 5-10 years ago to enable some of those, logistics systems that are going to be far better for the environment.
Thank you so much. So let's go into the specifics of Regeneration VC. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about the story, the genesis of it? I mean, what was the initial gap seen by the partners who started the fund, and that led to the thesis behind it?
Absolutely. So my partner, Michael Smith, and Dan Fishman are the two general partners, and myself and David Levine are partners as well. And we all came in together. I think it was 2020. I have known Michael for almost 10 years now, and he and I came to know each other through a couple of investor networks that, were focused on climate. And he and I always saw this shift no matter what. Like, how are we going to invest in solutions that are profitable, so it's no longer a question of, that's a nice thing to do, or that's an impact investment that's going to lose me money, or that's philanthropy, but actually creating the marketplace to drive deep decarbonization and shift multiple industries. So I actually remember very vividly, Michael and I were walking on the beach in California, which we both are from California and love it very, very much. And obviously, when you're looking at the beautiful ocean and, seeing life around you, and it really reminds you, oh, this is what, why we invest the way that we do. And we were walking, and we were kind of talking about, okay, what are the solutions that we need to focus on, right? We're deep in a pandemic, people are disconnected, we can't lose momentum on investing in climate solutions. And he and I had shared deals and worked on different things before. And he said, look, I've got this idea. My partner, Dan and I have made several investments with each other before. We know consumer markets really well. And he gave me a stat that was actually, I had no idea. He said that, based on research that a group called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done, about 45% of greenhouse gas emissions come from materials. So it's not just the energy and transport, which is very, standard when you're thinking about how we decarbonize or really address the climate crisis, but what we eat, what we everything that goes into the products we consume and the material inputs therein. And I went deeper into the kind of science behind that and what Ellen MacArthur had produced. There's also an incredible think tank called Circle Economy, and I was sold that we, for a long time within climate, consumer has not been something that you hear and think, oh, that's an area where you're going to have a huge impact. It often pushes the problem onto an individual, right? Or people think, oh, it's my fault that I couldn't buy something recycled, or that the system isn't there, or what have you, or it's too expensive. And what I really realized was, if we could shift the materials and invest in innovations that are going into what we touch, what we use, what's all around us, we could make a huge dent. And also, in the process of doing so, we can bring people on board and shift culture so that everyone is saying, oh, like, my household is low carbon, and also I'm a part of the solution, and it's easy to do. It's not expensive. It can be accessible to everyone and solve the crisis. So that really brought me in, and the partners and I, we all got together. We founded the fund, and raising capital in the middle of a pandemic is something that I'm sure you've heard from others is certainly interesting. A lot of Zoom calls, but we were able to close Fund 1. It's our first time investing together, but Fund 1 in March 2022. We've now approved 12 investments from Fund 1, and we're going to continue scaling up the platform and accelerating our investment thesis and also our approach globally to bringing households and consumer products into the center of the climate conversation, and particularly the climate tech conversation.
So what do you offer to founders that you invest in? I mean, usually, you know, there's like capital, there's access to a network or resource. I mean, what are the challenges in a way that you find very specific to them and that you try to address with your offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, I'll take one step back, which is we have seen more deals than I anticipated within the marketplace, right? There is so much innovation and it's very exciting. And there is a lot of capital going into climate tech, far less into consumer climate tech. We're actually one of the few that does that in the space. But there is more supply of innovation than there is investment going into that innovation. And I do think that there is perhaps a mismatch from where founders are at with either a technical innovation that needs to plug into an existing system, or the amount of capital necessary to take a truly transformative solution to the next level, which often is a very long process, right? And we're starting to see some of the benefits of the first waves of clean tech, where we're now seeing commercial viability. And it did take 10, 15 years for some of these investments to get to that level of maturation. So I think for us, when we're working with founders, we do invest at an early stage, right? So oftentimes these companies have some revenue, but they're about to go, commercial, and we're investing at the seed or Series A, as we call it in the US. And we're really there to help think about, okay, how do we get this to scale, right? Whether that's through offtake partnerships, whether it's through support even with media and messaging, so companies and founders know how to communicate with their potential partners, offtake partners, potential future investors, and of course their customers. And then we, I think, add a unique value in that we think about things holistically, and also supporting companies with being ahead of where policy might be going and finding ways to create systems that enable them to work within a marketplace that is either regulated or assuming that it will be regulated, right?
Thank you so much. I think it's a lot of added value that you guys are bringing to the table for founders in that in the space. I saw that, and that's a burning question. I saw that Leonardo Di Caprio is in the advisory of the fund, which is very exciting to have such a great personality on board. I mean, can you tell us a bit more about how is he helping the firm to accelerate its impact? I mean, why does, in a way, onboarding public figures matter, and how does he support Regeneration VC?
Well, great question. He is a wonderful human being and really walks the walk when it comes to the investments in the environment. And obviously, for someone as high profile as he is, we've learned a lot about him in the media, but he has an incredible team around him that works closely with us. And the great thing is he's not just an advisor, he's also an investor in our fund. So he has skin in the game. And what's more is we collaborate on deals. So we've co-invested with him on several deals. We share deal flow with each other. We've brought deals to him that he's now come in and invested, or his team has come in and invested on. So we really see it as a collaborative partnership. And then, of course, his profile enables us to reach consumers in a way that perhaps someone who is not a celebrity of that caliber does. We have a few other celebrities in the docket who have also co-invested with us, and that's been really interesting. Michael and Dan have a background and they are based in Southern California and have done a lot of work with celebrities. Michael actually used to be a world-renowned DJ before he turned investor. And so, he's always run businesses, but that was his passion. So, it's been really interesting for me coming from more of the policy, nerdy, wonk, climate scientist background, to collaborate with both Michael and Dan, and then get an opportunity to work with incredible folks like Leonardo Di Caprio, who really put their money where their values are and help us scale up these innovations, using that muscle.
So, which sectors are the most promising for you today in terms of like what I call ICR or impact cash return? I mean, meaning building impactful companies while creating highly profitable business. Do you see any underdogs or subsectors that are, really exciting you right now, besides the whole textile part that we discussed together?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Critical resource recycling and recycling technology. So, the ability to eliminate the need for virgin resources and actually sort some of the existing waste streams that we have. So, we've invested in a couple of companies that have different approaches to this, more on the SaaS side and artificial intelligence. So, enabling us to, scan municipal solid waste streams, identify what's there, and then sort appropriately so those materials can be reutilized. And I think that we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space. And the more we can stop mining rare earth minerals and or wasting, what we've already created in the world. And I'm sure many are familiar with Redwood Materials, who raised a pretty significant round on the recycling and upcycling front. And I think that they're making some significant breakthroughs. And I'm very excited to see where that space goes. And the infrastructure is not currently there for it to be as successful as I think many of us would want. But I think we're going to see huge strides in that space.
All right. So, on the opposite side, what we always ask also to investors is like, what is to you, according to you today, like maybe some areas where you feel there's too much hype and it might be maybe like not worth it to spend time and money and resources on it. Any like example without the need of naming any companies?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I actually think my point earlier about it took, 10, 15 years to see some of what we're now seeing as gaining significant traction. That took a lot of time. So I have a lot of respect for the investors who have come before us and around us who are elevating a lot of incredible clean technologies. I do think right now there is a perhaps oversaturation in, kind of artificial intelligence and SaaS-based, solutions. Not that we don't invest in some of those as well, but there is a need, especially within thinking about, design, reuse, and use of materials for hardware that enables that, right? And oftentimes, when it comes to some of the software plays, you see a lot of the same types of companies, and valuations have been a little bit wonky, and oftentimes these tools don't necessarily integrate into solving the problem that perhaps they set out to solve. Now, with that being said, I think there is a lot of incredible innovation in SaaS and artificial intelligence that's worth us paying attention to. We don't focus as much on that. I would also say, we've seen a lot of breakthroughs and focus on fusion, hydrogen, deep decarbonization of transportation. And there is a lot of capital within the climate tech world, and especially also from institutional investors and development finance institutions that are hyper focused on making that a reality, right? So decarbonizing industry in that sense. I do think that it's not an area where we want to put as much of our energy, because we, as I mentioned, 45% of greenhouse gas emissions, and then we're also talking about toxics and waste and the pollution of our oceans. So we're really focused on solving some of the material challenges on that front, and less around transport and industry.
So speaking about impact, at the contrary of other funds, you don't have like a specific target, like we invest only in 10 gigaton greenhouse gas avoided companies, or like that can avoid that in the term. So what is like your criteria? Do you have any of them, any specific process, any frameworks that you use, or do you rely on scientists and experts to validate the tech and the impact, or maybe some social impact as well?
Absolutely. So we created an internal process, or that I help spearhead, called the Regenerative Evaluation Gauge. So when we screen companies, due diligence on them, deeper diligence, and then ultimately make an investment decision and bring them into the portfolio, we then start a monitoring process. And the gauge enables us to look at 6 key themes that have all been benchmarked to global standards. So targets set by the Convention on Biological Diversity, which just recently had COP15 in Montreal. Science-based targets, which are associated with the Paris Accord, and of course the Sustainable Development Goals, which there's 17, but I'd say about 6 or 7 are highly relevant to us. But with REG, as we call it, the 6 themes are waste, resource and material footprint, toxics and chemicals, and carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, or climate footprint, and human, which is everything from end product and the consumer to the ways in which our companies are treating, their suppliers and their supplier code of conduct, and how the entire value chain looks and the impacts on human health, labor, et cetera. So we have a pretty comprehensive and holistic approach, and each one of those categories has subcategories that apply based on international standards. And we've used 150 different frameworks and over 5,000 different data points and metrics to come up with this system. And we tailor it to each company depending on the industry they're in, their market share, the projections for growth, the geography. So it's not exactly streamlined in the sense of this company is going to be abating a gigaton of carbon over the course of the lifetime. It's more holistically, we want to reach these top line targets set by around biodiversity, around climate, and we want to and waste reduction, zero waste. We want no harmful chemicals, right, based on REACH standards, and especially substances of high concern or very high concern. So we have screening and standards, but in terms of targets, we don't have the same approach that some funds in climate do, that our entire portfolio is going to abate 2 gigatons of carbon by this time. We want to participate based on our market share in enabling that to happen, and collaborating with other funds that are doing that, because that is in alignment with science-based targets in the Paris Accord. We are very, very much focused, though, on waste and toxic reductions as well, and ensuring that we preserve the health of natural ecosystems and enabling the supply of better inputs that can biodegrade, compost, and actually regenerate biological diversity.
So what's your personal view on the climate crisis? I mean, what would you say to the people who feel demoralized and by all the already visible consequences of climate change? I mean, are we doomed?
As I studied climate science, and obviously, my origin story is, watching my mother get very sick. And I think we've all lived through, especially being indoors and kind of being pressed to our own humanity and sometimes the fragility of that humanity. I have never-ending hope. There's an amazing woman. She helped lead Costa Rica in they're adopting the first climate policy. Her name's Cristiana Figueres. She has an entire book on climate optimism, and I highly recommend that for people to read, because we have to be optimistic. The solutions are all around us, right? So the embedded infrastructure that we're seeing that may be driving or accelerating the crisis, yes, it is scary, and we are facing some pretty real planetary challenges. So and it's going to continue. That is something I will say. It is a scientific fact. The IPCC reports are very, very gloomy, but they've been the same for many, many years. I think the way that we can focus on hope and optimism is continue to build solutions that displace those very things that are driving the crisis, and use this as perhaps the best opportunity in human history to reimagine how we build economies, how we work and collaborate with each other, how we relate to the natural world, and hopefully put systems back in place that we maybe have displaced without knowing it. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and I'm super inspired by the next generation. They're super, they grew up with iPhones in their hand, they have digital connectivity, and I understand that the world is on their shoulders but also at their fingertips. So I have this hope and also inspiration that if we continue investing in, not just based on their age, but the folks that are out there building every day and have great ideas and can bring that into the world, we have an incredible opportunity to shift the tide.
So how can the community of investors, experts, founders listening to the show can help you, and what's next for Regeneration VC?
Yeah, so it's an exciting time. I know that the world is a little bit wonky and things have been shaking out in an interesting way within the markets, and we're all feeling a bit of that pressure. So I certainly am not Pollyanna-ish on the fact that we've seen some headwinds, but right now, I think for us, we're super excited to continue building, public-private partnerships, working with regulatory agents, and collaborating with a lot that we were seeing come online with the Green New Deal and the, Inflation Reduction Act, and how we can ensure companies we've invested in at an early stage can get to the next level of, maturity. So we're always looking for, partnerships and ways that we can support our companies and help in their health and scale. And yeah, we're continuing to build our platform as most venture capital funds do. You don't just stop with fund one. So we will definitely continue to scale up and deploy capital.
Any question I should have asked you for this part of the show, or anything that you would like to add?
Well, let's see. I think
something we didn't cover that you wanted to share prior going to the
definitely.
section?
So one thing I'll say is, if you look at the statistics, I think less than 4% of venture capital is going to female-led companies. I'm very passionate about this because as someone who is a female founder and is also one of very few women within the industry, I am incredibly focused on how to create more space within the investment ecosystem for women, for folks of color, for people from different backgrounds, both founders and professionals, to participate in this process and really transform the industry. So we do start seeing companies coming online that are more representative of what the world looks like. So I think that, when you're talking, you asked me about what we need. I think we're really focused on how do we invest in companies that are going to represent the diversity that's needed, not just for the consumer base that we are serving, but also for the planet. And we believe that is fundamental to investment decision making. And also, proudly enough, more than half of our portfolio is founded by women or folks that identify as women, and that to us wasn't even part of our screening process necessarily. It just happened to be that these founders were incredible and we're paying attention. And I do think that there's an opportunity for a lot more of the investment community to pay attention to some of the kind of overlooked founders who are building incredible innovations in the world and do need more capital in order to bring them online.
Thank you so much, Katie, for your time. Incredible insight in the industry. I'm so excited to see so many brilliant people like you putting so much time and effort to move the ball towards a better and cleaner world. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to speaking again sometime
Thanks
soon.
again for joining us on the Tech for Climate podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned next week for more climate tech insights. In the meantime, head on over to our webpage at startupbasecamp.org, where we have lots more insights and resources for anyone wanting to get involved in climate tech. If you find our resources useful, please consider donating to support our small self-funded team. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends, and see you next time.